This podcast is intended for a mature audience over 19 years of age and is provided on an educational and informational basis. Any material presented is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as a substitute for professional medical advice or as an endorsement or medical claim by Pattison Media, Everything Podcast, or Ripco.pro.
Let's see how the sausage is made.
I'm a grower. I spend a lot of time at Pure Fire's facility in BC where my own strain, Nagano Gold, is currently shooting up. I call it private reserve. I'm used to seeing cannabis up close, from seed to bud. I know the plant itself.
But for those of us not in the industry, the closest we get to an actual plant is probably picking up some dried and cured bud in a plastic container from a dispensary. So today, we're sending our reporter, Jay, to a craft grower in Ontario.
Probably 5 kilos in there?
I never thought I'd probably be holding a bag of 5 kilos of weed for work.
You never say never, right?
Jay's going to see what it actually takes to grow such a heavily regulated plant. That's later in the show.
Before that, though, one of my favorite parts of the process is phenohunting. Whenever you see a new strain in the dispensary, someone had to develop that. They grew plant after plant trying to find the perfect smoke. That's phenohunting. But there's way more to it than just growing a few plants and seeing which smokes best. It's more art than science. So after the news, you're going to hear myself and 2 other growers talk about the quest for the best bud.
I'm Don Schaefer.
And I'm Ross Rebagliati. This is the Canadian Podcast.
And that's all coming up after the pot news with Jay Coburn.
Proposed changes to Canada's cannabis regulations have been made public by Health Canada. If the proposals become law, then transparent windows in packaging would be legalised, as would QR codes. The changes would also legalise the sale of pollen between licensed producers. However, the controversial THC limit of 10 milligrams per package of edible cannabis remains in place. The document also notes that excise tax is not within Health Canada's purview, and so any changes to that would need to be administered by the CRA. A Nova Scotia court has rejected a claim that the members of a First Nation can operate cannabis stores outside of provincial and federal cannabis regulations. A judge rejected the claim that a treaty right to sell cannabis exists and that there is evidence Millbrook First Nation had engaged in the cultivation or selling of cannabis prior to contact with Europeans. However, the judge did note that they would welcome a stronger argument made along those lines. And Indiva has entered creditor protection. The Canadian edibles producer is restructuring its business under bankruptcy protection laws as it seeks to sell assets to repay creditors. Indiva is responsible for edible brands No Future, Bang, and Doppio, among others. That's the pot news. Back to you, Don and Ross.
Jay will be back later to take us inside a cannabis farm, where he'll learn how commercial weed is grown. But before that, we're going to focus on phenohunting, the art of creating a new strain.
One of the rooms I like to spend time in is the pheno room at Pure Fire's facility in British Columbia. That's the room where master grower Devin Sanborn and CEO Cody Lewis do their phenohunting. It's part art, part science. You've got to have a bit of horticultural knowledge, but the flavor, the high, that's all down to your own preference.
The closest analogy I can think of is growing grapes for wine. You've got to know how the nutrients and atmosphere will affect the grapes. But choosing the right grape is up to the people who run the winery.
Let me tell you how the process goes from a purely technical point of view. You plant a seed and let it grow. If it's looking good, take a few clippings and let them grow too. Those are clones. Now you've got a bunch of plants with the same genetics. You can fertilize female plants with male pollen to create seeds, which will be similar to your mom plant but a bit different, like how you're different from your parents and siblings. But you want to see how a strain smokes, so you've got to let some of those plants bud. If it's what you're looking for, awesome. Clone your mom plant a bunch of times and grow a ton of great weed. If it's almost there, keep crossing it with different genetics, different pollens. Rinse, smoke, repeat.
That's the simple version. But phenohunting is an art. So we decided to get 3 artists together and talk about their craft.
I'm Cody Lewis. I'm co-founder and CEO of Pure Fire here in Penticton, BC.
And I'm Devin Sanborn, and I'm the master grower here and head of production.
I suppose that makes me the third artist, right? We'll get onto the craft in a second, but let's hear a bit about Purifier first.
Our story is similar to a lot in the industry, but slightly different at the same time. It's kind of been a bit of a family affair, I guess you could say, for a long time. I got hurt at work, so I got into the plant a little bit for pain management, that type of thing. And around the same time, my father's always had a big passion for the plant, and he was doing a little bit of growing here and there, and he actually was building out a new facility, and he got hurt skateboarding at 50 years old. So I came in to help him just do the build out. I was heavy equipment operator by trade, so I was pretty familiar with construction, those types of things. And that was almost a decade ago. I never left. Wow. So turns out I really enjoyed being around the plants, the whole aspect of it. And from there, it turned into this family project and something that we all really seemed to enjoy. And Devin came on very shortly after I did, and it's got started and haven't looked back since.
Yeah, it's amazing how time flies. So let's get into the basics of phenohunting here, guys. I know what it is, you know what it is, but most people have probably never heard the word phenohunting before today. So let's define it. What is phenohunting? And I've got a little definition here. Phenohunting is the process of selecting and curating strains of cannabis through selective breeding to achieve a desired result. Devin, how do you get started? Do you have a certain set of characteristics that you're looking for? Or is it more like grow what you have and see where it goes?
We're definitely looking for characteristics. We've grown so many strains over the years that it really comes down to when we're trying to pick out of our seed bank, when we have a massive seed bank, we're trying to go off of memory of what the strains were giving us when we were growing them, the females, and then kind of go from there. So we'll pick the seeds based off of that and then pop as many as we're feeling like. And then from there, we'll look for structure and size and just strength and overall vigor.
Like Devin said, we've got so many genetics, and it's something we've been doing for so long. We're very spoiled in that aspect, but it allows us to be very selective in what our goal is for that particular breeding project. Our breeding projects are always gone into with intent of a desired particular outcome, whether we're looking for some indica strains or sativas or whatnot, hybrids, what kind of features we want those plants to have, what grow space they're growing into, what terp profile we're looking for, potency, all those different things come into play when we're trying to select out of these genetics.
And when you say terp profile, what do you mean by terp?
So terpene, as far as most people consider that the nose or smell and taste profile that goes along with it. That's one of the things that I think, is a big focus in the industry now. It's kind of swung that way, away from just high THC percentages, that type of stuff. For us, it's always been important. We're growers first. We're definitely cultivators at heart and breeders. So it was always, what do we like? What do we want to grow? What would we want to smoke?
Yeah.
We try to pay a little bit of attention to what the industry's doing and what people want, but a lot of the time we're going with something that just excites us and something that we want to do, not necessarily just what everyone else in the industry is.
So it's personal.
It is. It 100% personal.
Yeah.
It's comes down to what are me and Devin enjoying, is what are we having fun with? What do we want to try? Something new, something old, We really play around a lot that way.
You get a much better result, I find, when you go that route. If you're having fun, you're doing something right.
Now, when it comes to phenohunting and crossbreeding different cultivars, our listeners might not know, but it's the male plant that produces the pollen that you use to fertilize the female plant. Now, how do you get the pollen from the male over to the female? Like, how does that work?
I've tried it a few different ways, and obviously you can grow a male in a room with a female and it'll pollinate across, and then you can move forward. You get a lot of seeds that way, and so I prefer to do it a little more precisely, where I'll take a paintbrush and I'll literally just paint on the pollen onto individual buds. And then we can kind of ballpark our numbers that way a little bit better. We're not getting 1,000 seeds of one cross, because it's hard enough to pheno through 100 seeds, let alone 1,000, right? So we're just trying to keep it at an amount that's good for us to work with, but enough that we have the ability to keep popping more and more seeds if we're unhappy with the phenos that we're seeing from them. If I have one strain of pollen that I want to go on to several other strains, then it's easier to do it in a room in a small amount like that. I can control it a little bit better with the paintbrush.
Now, I've had the privilege of seeing your pheno room, and it's like unbelievably organized. There's tags hanging off different branches of the same plant. When I see a plant with multiple tags hanging off the branches, what does that signify?
rather than doing multiple females of the same strain to get all these different pollens on it, I grow one female plant that's going to get pollinated. And if I have multiple pollens, then I'll spread those branches out. I'll stake them to the side so they're separated fully, and then I'll put different pollens on the same female plant. Saves time, saves space. And with doing it precisely with the paintbrush and very slowly and methodically, you can get multiple pollens on one female strain, and just cuts the time in half and the space in half. So instead of having to have 5 females of the same strain in a room to get 5 different pollens, I can put those 5 pollens on the one female strain and have success in that manner.
So in effect, when you do that, you're pollinating each branch with a different pollen. You're crossing that branch with a different strain. You're going to end up with multiple new strains coming from that one female plant.
Yeah.
From this point here, do you take a clipping from each of those branches and then turn that into a mother plant that you could get more clippings from, so you could do the phenohunt? Is that basically the concept there?
Almost. So what we would do in that scenario is harvest the seeds from each branch. And that's also where we get all of our male pollen as well. All of our pollen comes right from feed males. And for phenohunting, once you take a clone, it's essentially, that's just one phenotype now that you're using. So to phenohunt, you have to pop several different seeds. The way I like to explain phenohunting is not all children are the same height, even though they're from the same parents, right? Sometimes you get a star athlete and sometimes you get a genius, right? They're different, same genetics, but different.
I didn't turn out to be the genius. I'll just put it that way.
No, but you got the star athlete right there. And we'll just take those seeds, like Devin said, whether it's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 at a time, we'll pop those. And then you got to grow all of those out to do your phenohunt. And that's where, even from the start, we'll be very selective. Any of the really slow ones will get culled right away. Anything that stays too short, too tall, not healthy in any way, those are the first ones to go. And once you get down to your last, if you're being really picky, it should be only a couple. You go from there. At that point, we take clones to create moms in case there's going to be some winners right off the hop. We'll actually flower out the moms of those phenos just to speed things up a little bit. We are a micro cultivation facility, so we're a little bit short on space. I wish we had way more room for phenohunting and breeding, but we do what we can with what we got. And that's, again, why Devin likes to do the breeding, one female, multiple male pollens on it. It allows us to just really get a lot more done in a smaller space.
When you're in the room actively phenohunting, you're watching these ladies grow up. Is there anything that would make you ditch the strain before you even grow it?
Yeah, I mean, we recently just did a phenohunt, and we had 2 females of one strain. It was strawberry lemonade, and the one, very nice, very pretty, tons of sugar, decent size. And then the other pheno still had nice sugar and look to it, good smell, but the size wasn't there. For whatever reason, it didn't produce. The buds didn't pop like they should have. And so that pheno scrapped right away. There's no need to move forward with it. And then the other one isn't moving into production. It's moving into a second round of testing. We don't just grow it once and then throw it in. We have to grow it at least 2 to 3 times before we're sold on it being a winner.
Cody, how much does market demand factor into what you're looking for when you're curating strains?
Honestly, probably not as much as it should.
Maybe that's how it should be, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I really like to think we do things kind of at the beat of our own drum here, so to speak. And like I said, we do pay attention to market trends, kind of see where everybody's going. And if candy's taken over for the year, we will put out some candy or hunt for some of those during the same time. We just always make sure it's never our sole focus. We're always looking for something new, something different. And I think that shows in a lot of the strains we put out. We really try to find stuff that's unique to market, not to say we haven't put out something that is really popular in market as well, mostly just to show people what we're capable of. If there's a popular genetic that's going around and we've got a cut somewhere that we think can compete with that, just a little bit of competitiveness, we're more than happy to put that out, see how it does. So it's fun that way.
And Cody, is it important to you that you have a lot of variety in Purifire's stable of strains, or are you more into having a particular niche?
We're big on variety. I think it resonates well with the consumers. The market today that we have noticed is what's new. Everybody wants what's new, what's new, what's new. There are certain people that obviously they find a strain and, you know, it really clicks well with them and they like to stick with that for a while. But from an overall perspective, I would say people are always searching for that new thing. And as breeders and phenohunters, that's what excites us anyway. We don't want to grow the same thing for years on end. We'd rather swap them out pretty quickly, so we tend to do that.
Are there particular early signs, Devin, that make you excited about a new strain? Something that gets your mouth watering?
Mostly for me, being on the grow side of it, I really look for structure and health and vigor. When we're phenohunting, I'm looking for strength first and foremost, especially because that's going to be the first signs that you see when you're phenohunting. Until you get into the later stages of flower, a lot of the perspective on it is strength and structure and what it's going to give us as far as not so much ease of growing, but for lack of a better term, ease of growing, because you don't want it to be overly difficult to grow, but you want those characteristics that some of those strains do end up showing. We have found over the years that some of the nicest strains are the trickiest ones to grow, unfortunately, but it's a challenge.
Now, when you say structure, what exactly do you mean?
So I'm looking for branch structure. I'm looking for height. Some of our rooms are limited to our ceiling heights, and so I'm looking for some plants that are going to be of a shorter structure. They branch out well. I don't want something that's tall and spindly and going to be, like I said, a nightmare to grow. Even though those ones can be grown in shorter rooms, it just requires more attention to detail and training and structure steering.
Yeah, exactly. What are the trends you're seeing in the market with regards to strains and phenohunting? Where do you see the growers going?
What we've seen in the last year or so is a lot of the stuff is either search for the new candies, all about the really loud flavors and terps. There is definitely a desire as well for some of the more old school stuff. A lot of it kind of got left behind when legalization happened and took over, and it turned into this giant hunt for THC, and most of these old school strains don't carry that the way that a lot of these new hybrids and different things do. So there's a bit of that going on now too. People are starting to realize that a lot of these strains that were favorites for so long have gone missing, so there's kind of a search for those. But I would say for the most part, it's all about loud terps, flavor. It's slowly getting away from the THC game, I believe, which excites me because we've got a lot of strains in the stable that we would love to put out, but they got to be picked up by the provincial boards, and they're still very much buying off, unfortunately, high numbers and different things like that. So our goal is mostly, those loud flavors, loud terps, whether it's new school, old school, gas, candy, tropical.
Once the pheno hunt is over, there's one last thing to do: test it. That's the best bit, because there's only one real way to test cannabis flower: smoke up.
That is the final test, yeah, for sure. Obviously, there's several things and steps that happen before we get to that point. But yeah, absolutely, it has to smoke well, right? You can have the prettiest plant in the world, and if it doesn't taste good, if it doesn't smoke well or burn well, it means nothing. So that is definitely one very important factor. We have, our latest cup-winning strain, I guess you can say. We just won the Air Cannabis Cup. It's not the most visually appealing strain we have as far as bag appeal goes, but it's flavor, right? It's the way it burns and the flavor that it carries all the way through that burn. It's next level that way. And that just goes to show, right? It doesn't have to be the prettiest thing, but it has to burn well. It has to taste good. Those are two things that become very important. When it's in a joint, it doesn't matter how it looks. How does it taste?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a secret. I think it's a similar process for most growers. Like Devin said, it starts right from seed form. Which ones take off? How is their health? Are they a strong genetic, really? Does it fit the size and shape that you need? Does it fit the production requirements as far as weight? It's just little things that all add up to the best one of the bunch. Whether it's taste, smell, burn, THC, terps, they all come into play throughout. The last and final, most important step is, what does it smoke like?
From my own experience smoking the Purifier product, when you do smoke it, you light that joint, that ash is snow white. Now, that's what you're talking about by a clean burn.
Yeah, a little bit. There's been some conversation definitely the last little while about, some people are now kind of the theory it doesn't always have to be perfectly white per se, but it's always a pretty good indication just from an objective standpoint.
And that cleanliness of the burn does go back to the initial pheno hunt as well. And that's the strength that we're looking for. If a plant is nice and strong and can handle what we're throwing at it, that's a bonus. That's going to give you a much cleaner burn in the end. That plant's going to develop all the way through the whole cycle Whereas if it's a bit of a weaker plant to begin with, then it's going to be harder to get that clean, full, nice fern from it. We want something that's healthy and all the way through.
Something that can process the food that you're giving it and turn it into product instead of that food ending up in the finished bud at the end.
Absolutely.
You want the plant to like eat everything completely, and then at the end of the cycle, you give it lots of water, flush out all the food and whatnot that could be in there and help it along to finishing.
Yeah, 100%. There's definitely a few different techniques for that, but as we say, a healthy plant is a happy plant.
That was Cody Lewis, CEO and founder at Pure Fire Cannabis, and Devin Sanborn, master grower and head of production. Oh yeah, and master grower Ross Rebagliati as well.
Phenohunting. It's just one part of growing, and maybe the best way to understand this is to actually see it. So we sent our reporter Jay Coburn to a craft grower in Ontario. He's going to go through how cannabis is grown room by room.
Siege Cannabis is on the outskirts of Kitchener, Ontario, in an industrial area. Think warehouses and corrugated steel separated by large parking lots and grassy patches. You wouldn't know that this building is a pot farm.
Well, the sign out there is from the old owner. I just left it because I don't really care too much about signage. So I'll quickly just show you here. This just a cleaning area.
This is Benjamin Podvani. He's showing me around today.
I am a cannabis cultivator. I have one micro cultivation facility in Brantford, Ontario, and I have a second cultivation facility in Kitchener, Ontario. We are a business that goes B2B, so we sell it to bigger LPs that'll brand it, put their own name on it. Sometimes we grow our own strains, sometimes we grow a strain that they tell us to give. We don't really care, we just want to grow great premium flower.
Those bigger LPs he's talking about are huge names like Carmel and Black Market, heavy-hitting, top-draw cannabis. So I was eager to get up close and personal with some of those plants. But before I got to see those, Ben took me up on top of the grow rooms.
It's a little hot over here.
Oh yeah, it's hot there.
You're okay on ladders?
Yeah. Well, I'm not good with heights.
I haven't gotten the stairs yet.
Okay. So what I'm seeing here is I'm standing on top of a room that I presume is full of cannabis plants, and I can see industrial ventilation and dehumidification equipment. The fans you can hear are a whole bunch of air conditioning units that are presumably keeping the room below very cool, but making us up here very sweaty.
Yeah.
And it's just a big sort of classic looking industrial plant from up here. The main giveaway that there's anything underneath is that I can smell weed. Presumably through these AC units.
We started the tour here for a good reason. Before I go into those rooms full of plants, Ben wanted to show me how delicately controlled the atmosphere is in the facility beneath.
Dehumidification is very important inside a grow room because you got to keep the humidity down. If you have a high humidity, it can degrade your product. It's more when you get into the later flower, humidity becomes a bigger factor because there could be mold growing on it, and if mold is growing on it, obviously it degrades your product. No one wants to smoke moldy weed.
And it's not just the humidity in the air that is controlled.
This is CO2 lines. All this blue line, there's CO2. So you actually need to put CO2 into the rooms if you're growing indoor because that's what plants need. CO2 is their oxygen.
So that's just in the air downstairs.
Yeah, but it's like not at a higher level that'll harm us, but it's a higher level than usual.
The water these plants get is heavily controlled too. It's purified by reverse osmosis and then mixed with a murky green solution of concentrated nutrients that are fed through tubes to the grow room downstairs. I didn't record myself climbing back down the ladder. Nobody needs to hear a grown man with a fear of heights sound quite so pathetic. Now, time to enter the growing facility proper.
So I'm going to change my shoes, but this is the gowning area.
Okay, so we're in a little airlock type space where there's a whole bunch of white lab coat type things and hair nets.
Yeah,
putting on a.
Those are booties. That's for your shoes.
Oh, these are booties.
Because we run a sealed environment, and I know we move the air around somewhat inside the other rooms. Anything that goes into these rooms does not come out. right? Because like whatever you bring in, there's no chance of it coming out. Versus outside, or even a greenhouse for that matter, stuff you bring in can blow out. Obviously, you don't want to bring anything in, even into a greenhouse, but in an indoor facility, it's very, very strict. So we can start with the mother room. So this used to be a hash room.
Right.
So we've actually converted this into a mother room.
Ben showed me into a room lit with a bright white light. This is where the first stage of growing happens. It felt a bit like a plant creche with parents and babies. There were 2 aisles of grey pallets. One aisle of pallets was full of baby cannabis plants in small trays with condensation-laden transparent covers. On the other side were some bigger plants with almost tree-like trunks.
These are moms. So moms mean... Do you have any brothers or sisters?
Yeah, I've got a sister.
From the same parents?
Yes.
Presumably? So when you guys came from the same parents, 2 different seeds, two different people.
Couldn't be more different, you're right.
So, but if someone liked you more, because of your characteristics, and they wanted more of you, you'd grow out and then take little bits of you and grow more of you. So now you have a consistent product of you, right?
So that's cloning, right?
But if they liked your sister better, they'd do that same thing. And it's good actually, there's male and female, because in cannabis you obviously only want the female. So typically, unless you're doing a breeding project, you wouldn't keep a male, so you'd get scrapped right away. And then your sister, because it's female, just like cannabis plants wise, they would take multiple clones, and obviously if there's desired traits, whatever the desired trait, whether it be THC or yield, whatever the desired trait is, they can make a consistent product every single time. And in order to do that, you got to keep moms.
I just want to note that you can't actually clone me, my sister, or anyone else by taking a small piece of us and putting it in the ground. I think that's probably a good thing. Some of the smaller plants on the other side of the room were a phenohunt in progress.
See, there's multiple strains in here, but these came from the same seed, but you see it's number 11, number 4, number 1, number 12. So we've labeled them as 1 through 12 of this specific strain. We take a cut of that, we keep it in a veg state, not in flower, so they'll grow into plants like this, these ones. The other, what we took the cuts from, we put it in the flowering, we grow it out its full cycle to see what it's gonna be. We pick, a lot of the times we throw out everything. But if there's like a unicorn, like an animal face for instance, you can see what the finished product is and have the mother plant.
Once Ben and his team have settled on a strain they like, then it's time to make a bunch of clones. He shows me how they can take clones from the tiniest little branch.
We can take lots of cuts, right? Typically, you like a nice lateral, that would be 1 cut. I could get a cut off of that, I could get a cut off of that, I could get a cut off of that. But I want to leave some of these to make it grow back. Depending on how hard you want to push it, you can take multiple cuts. As long as it has a node right here, so that's a node that where it comes out. You probably won't have as much success rate if you don't take like a big enough clone, but any tiny amount, as long as there's a node on it, it will grow roots.
Those clones are planted into rock wool, coconut husks, or a combination of the two. And after they've been flooded with nutrients for a couple of weeks, they're taken to another room, where they're allowed time to grow to full size. Ben referred to this next state as veg, as in vegetation. The room was bathed in orange light. Rows and rows of cannabis plants filled the space, all planted in bags with rock wool and coconut husk.
So you're looking at all one strain, and you can see, remember when I was telling you about the seeds and having this consistent genetic? This plant looks exactly like this plant. The end product will look exactly the same across the board. It's being fed the same. These 2 things are the nutrients water. So it comes from those tanks. The pump turns on, it goes back up, and then down each one of these lines.
Little white monitoring devices were stabbed into some of the bags, keeping tabs on moisture and nutrients. Ben gets alerts on his phone if anything isn't quite right.
These are on different zones, so we can actually feed to the exact second, and we can figure out exactly how much water each plant needs by doing the math. So this is a 1 gallon pot of a 1 gallon, this is cocoa, this is coconut husks ground up, and then this is rock wool. This is our style. A lot of people have different styles on doing it. There's no right or wrong way to do something. However it works, most practical, especially when you're getting to the large scale. Large scale, you got to try and simplify it as much as possible.
This was the first of 3 production rooms I visited, with plants in different stages of growth. The plants in the first room were pretty tall.
This is a different genetic. You can already see it looks a little different. This is Gorilla Glue number 4. You've probably heard of that strain if you smoke weed.
And I can see these plants, are they just a little younger or do they grow a little squatter?
That's just how they grow. They grow a little squatter.
And so this is a production room, like these plants will grow and
Into
bud,
flower.
and you'll take that flower and cure it. And
So
send that
this
to market.
room is being flipped next Friday. So in 1 week. Typically, honestly, these are good enough to flower now. I like to give them a little extra veg time also because we're trying to get our yields up a little bit more inside. And also, one of my biggest things too are the cycles. Cycles are very important. Certain things have to be on because our dry room is the same as the trimming room. So like things have to make sure everything is on point.
Ben likes to keep his plants in a veg state for longer than most to allow them to grow stronger and taller. But like you heard him say there, it's about the cycle. When you have a limited amount of space and workers, you want to make sure you're using your resources efficiently. If the plant's cycles aren't aligned, then he might end up with 1 week where all 3 rooms have to be trimmed at the same time, and that is a labor-intensive process. But he and his team can control when the plants flower and start producing buds.
Right now they're on an 18-hour cycle light. So like 18 hours on, 6 hours off. When we're gonna flip, it's as simple as just changing it to a 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Automatically will trigger flower.
Right.
The smell of cannabis had been invading my senses ever since I got past the gowning area. But it was nothing compared to what came next. This was honestly what I had been waiting for, a room full of weed, heavy with buds.
Oh, it smells like fruity in here.
Yeah, it's the strain, and plus we still got the leaves in here as well that we gotta get rid of. So this is all the same genetic.
That's like quite a different aroma to the rest of the facility. Like it's a really, the closest thing I can say is it smells like lychee.
Yeah, I can see that.
Like it's very, very fruity, but in a sort of, not a overtly citrusy way, kind of a rounded berry-like smell.
I'm obsessed with the smell of this strain. It's called Banjo, by the way. Not too high THC, pretty chilled out body high, and a rich, berry-like flavor. Exactly my kind of smoke. Honestly, I was like a kid in a toy shop. There was just so much weed around me. About 400 to 500 plants per room.
So per plant, I like to always hit at least 100 grams finished, completely finished, trimmed off the stalk. But it depends. Sometimes you can get like 200 grams.
The next part of growing takes a lot of work. A team comes in to chop the plants down, then they're hung to dry on trellises in a drying room. I didn't spend a ton of time there. I didn't want to get in the way of the folks who were working away chopping buds from dried plants. They sort the buds between big and small. The big ones get sold for a higher price to be sold as dried flower, and the smalls go into pre-rolls. That part is not done in this facility though. Ben's a B2B guy, business to business. He sells his dried cannabis to a processor who takes it to market. The dried product is stored in a secure room. Health Canada insists on that. Anything else, like leaves, has to be destroyed to ensure it doesn't end up on the black market. This room was pretty fun too. Just kilos and kilos of cannabis sitting there curing. Ben's right-hand man Jacob explained curing to me. Or at least he tried to explain it to someone who has no idea what's going on.
I find it's like a wine sort of thing.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's fermenting.
Like, or whiskey, or like anything. It has to almost like age properly.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
And it only brings out better flavors and better like smells and better. It makes the smoke so much cleaner after.
Yeah, aged cheese. It's a good idea.
Like,
so if you have like a cheddar that's like not as aged as much, it has a different consistency, it's got a different flavor, and then you give it a few more years, it has that flavor, same flavor, but it's got a little different. I don't really know how to describe it.
As far as I can tell, you're basically leaving the cannabis to sort of stew in its own juice. The flavor spreads more evenly throughout the plant. But I think this fuzziness on my part with how curing works is okay, because I get the sense that despite the tightly controlled atmosphere and the constant oversight from Health Canada, this is an industry that thrives on people who are willing to just try things out and see what happens. People like Benjamin Podvani.
really don't know a lot of stuff. Like I don't have a PhD in like horticulture, and like if something goes wrong, I just look it up on the YouTube. So like I feel like it's a lot of trial and error. Like there is an art to it, and like you do have to have it. I don't know if you understand. Like when you look at the plant, you kind of gotta look, okay, how does it look? Okay, that something looks off on it, or yeah, okay, the shoots, something's wrong. Like I don't know, it's hard to explain. You either have it or you don't have it, and it doesn't have to be cannabis specific. Like for a grower, they can come in and say, oh yeah, okay, that looks a little bit off, or like on the plant itself. So like there is art, but if you're hiring for a master grower specifically for cannabis, do you want the guy with the PhD with a bunch of schooling, or do you want a legacy guy who's been growing in the basement for 10, 20 years? Which one would probably be better? You'd probably get a lot of better habits from the PhD guy, but the guy who's been growing in the basement has troubleshooted tons of stuff, learned a lot of stuff on his own, and probably can grow better cannabis. Not saying all, but probably. I put my money on the legacy guy over the PhD guy who knows everything. They both have their own. I would hire both if I had the money, don't get me wrong. But I would rely on the legacy guy more so than the PhD guy. And I like to think of myself as both.
It's kind of an interesting dichotomy that you have. I find this a lot in the cannabis industry. A lot of the growers are people who are legacy guys, or maybe even they're just someone who was like, I want to experiment growing my own weed, and then move into what is a very heavily regulated, quite scientific field that has a lot of art involved. And so there seems to be a constant, like, I don't know if conflict's the right word, but friction between the growers and Health Canada. How do you work with Health Canada?
You need a really good QA. So that's Catherine.
Meaning quality assurance?
Quality assurance. So like, I was in my micro, and Jess, I really wish you could have met her, and she came in the beginning with me and helped me, and she worked at other facilities before, and she knew a lot of the regulations. She's not a QA, like QAP or whatever, but she had to work in an environment like that, so she knew a lot of the rules, and thank God she came at the right time, because I actually just got audited like when she first came, and she helped me a lot with that. And I saw the value in having someone who knows the regulations, who keeps you on the path. And Catherine's just like, she is very, very good at what she does. But she also knows the way like the cultivation works, right? Like, but QAPs, they are like the voice to Health Canada. And that's mandatory on a processing license. Cultivation can have it too. But I think mandatory, you need it on processing.
How often do you speak to someone from Health Canada?
In this facility, seems like a lot. We've actually just been audited, but we report to Health Canada every month. So we do a report. We actually have to do the Health Canada and the CRA. So they know what's going on in the facility on a monthly basis. And really, Health Canada really isn't unreasonable. They're humans too. I mean, yeah, sometimes they can get frustrating with some of the things that they say. I'm like, oh, are you saying, you kind of roll your eyes at it, but at the same time, they're reasonable.
One thing Ben was keen to hammer home for me was how tight the margins are for small growers like him. As a journalist who covers cannabis, I wasn't particularly surprised by this, but I think perhaps investors who went in on the cannabis stock gold rush early on in legalization will be. As a cultivator, he currently gets between $1 and $3 per gram that he sells. And this is quality bud, the kind of stuff that's $50 for 3.5 grams in the store. That's one stress point. Another is the market right now is all about one thing.
This market is very much THC driven. Very, very THC driven. That was a big shock actually for me when I came into the industry, and that was another tough thing. Producers won't give you top dollar. It could be the best looking bud, best smoke. You don't tell them anything. You just tell them to, like, yeah, this is some of the best weed I've smoked. But then it comes back at 22, 23%. All of a sudden, the price point goes down at least 40%.
Once this cannabis has been harvested, dried and cured, it has to be tested. Partly for health reasons, to make sure there are no harmful chemicals or mold in the plant, but also to determine the THC and CBD content. Personally, I love a good quality smoke that isn't too strong. I want to be able to share it with friends without worrying we're all going to get knocked out. When someone like Ben has poured heart and soul into growing a beautiful product, I want to take the time to enjoy it.
That was our reporter Jay Coburn at Siege Cannabis in Kitchener, Ontario. Thanks to Benjamin Padvani for letting us inside his facility. You can find them on Instagram at Siege Cannabis. The Canadian Podcast is an Everything Podcast production in partnership with Ripco.pro. The opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the views of the podcast team or our partners. This show is intended for a 19-plus audience. Thanks to the Canadian Podcast Ross Rebagliati, showrunner Karen Habashi, senior writer Jay Coburn, and our sound engineer John Massacre. I'm Don Schaefer. Thanks for listening to the Canadian Podcast, the authority on cannabis in Canada. Another Everything Podcast production. Visit everythingpodcast.com, a division of Pattison Media. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast.